I did not say a word. I picked up my coffee cup, walked to the kitchen window, and stood there looking out at the backyard until I trusted myself to speak again. That took about 4 minutes. My daughter was sitting at my kitchen table with a bruise on her wrist she hadn't mentioned, wearing long sleeves in July in Georgia and telling me everything was fine. I have spent 31 years as a forensic accountant. I have testified in federal court. I have sat across the table from men who looked me in the eye and told me numbers that didn't add up, and I always knew before they finished the sentence. I knew my daughter's numbers didn't add up either. Her name is Nadia. She's 36 years old. She has her father's eyes and my mother's stubbornness. And when she was 9, she corrected her teacher in front of the entire class because the teacher had the wrong answer and Nadia didn't see any reason not to say so. She was not a child who kept quiet. She was not a woman who kept quiet either. Not until she married him. His name is Preston. He came into her life the way certain men do, arriving exactly when she was distracted, when she had just gotten a promotion that meant 80-hour weeks and not enough sleep, when her defenses were low and her loneliness was higher than she would ever have admitted. He was charming in the way that well-dressed men sometimes are when they are working at it. He laughed at her jokes. He called when he said he would call. He told her she was the most capable woman he had ever met, and then slowly, over about 2 years, he worked very hard to make sure she stopped believing that. I didn't see it at first. That is the part that still sits in my chest some mornings. The first time I visited their apartment in Atlanta, he made dinner. Salmon, roasted vegetables, a good Pinot Grigio. He asked me about my career. He told me Nadia talked about me constantly. He said, and I remember this exactly, she thinks the sun rises because you allow it to. I thought he was wonderful. I drove home thinking my daughter had found someone who saw her the way she deserved to be seen. I should have paid more attention to the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. Not with love. With calculation. The way you look at a road in bad weather. Constantly checking, constantly adjusting, making sure you don't slide off the edge. The changes came in stages. That is how it always works with men like Preston, though I didn't have the language for it yet. First, it was small things. She stopped wearing the red dress she loved because he said it was a lot. She started ordering whatever he ordered at restaurants, and when I asked her once why she hadn't gotten the shrimp she always got, she said she'd been wanting to try something new. She said it without meeting my eyes. Then she stopped coming home for Sunday dinners. It had been our tradition for years. Her, me, her Aunt Ruby, who lives 20 minutes from me. Sometimes her friend Keisha, who has known Nadia since the 3rd grade. Preston said Sundays were their day. I understood. Newlyweds needed their time. I stepped back. Then Keisha called me. Keisha is not a woman who panics. She has 3 kids and a full-time job, and she once changed a tire on I-285 in the rain without calling anyone for help. When she called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, "Miss Odette, I need to talk to you about something," I sat down before she finished the sentence. She had seen Nadia at Lenox Square 2 weeks before. They had bumped into each other near the Nordstrom entrance. Nadia had seemed happy to see her, genuinely happy, the way you are when you've been somewhere quiet for too long, and a familiar voice is a relief. They had coffee, but the whole time, Keisha said, Nadia kept checking her phone, not the way you check for messages, the way you check the time on a test you're afraid of running out of. When Keisha asked her about it, Nadia said Preston liked to know her schedule. When Keisha asked what happened if she ran late, Nadia looked out the window and said, "He worries." That night I lay in bed and made a list in my head, the way I do when numbers aren't reconciling. What I knew, what I didn't know, what I didn't know, what I needed to find out. What I knew, my daughter had stopped wearing red, had stopped coming to Sunday dinner, was checking her phone like a woman expecting a consequence. What I didn't know, how bad it was, how long it had been this bad, whether the bruise I'd seen on her wrist 3 months ago, which she said was from a cabinet door, was actually from a cabinet door. What I needed to find out, whether my daughter still trusted me enough to tell me the truth, and if she didn't, how to make sure she knew I was there anyway. I didn't call her the next morning. I drove to Atlanta. I told her I was in the area for a meeting, which was a lie, and I brought kolaches from her favorite bakery in Decatur because she has loved them since she was small. And I sat at her kitchen counter while she made us both coffee, and I watched her move through her own home. There is something you notice if you know how to look, not what a person does, but what they are careful not to do. Nadia didn't open the cabinet next to the refrigerator. She positioned herself just slightly so that her back was to the window that faced the parking lot. When Preston's name came up, I mentioned it casually, just said I hoped he was having a good week. She straightened. Not a big movement. The way a person straightens when they hear a sound they're not sure about. I ate my kolache and talked about nothing. About my neighbor's new dog, about a book I was reading, about the fact that the HVAC in my house had been making a sound that the technician couldn't identify and had been charging me for the privilege of not identifying it. Nadia laughed. Real laughing, the kind that gets away from you. And for a little while she was just my daughter again, sitting in a kitchen, eating pastry. Then his car pulled into the parking lot and she saw it through the window, and the laugh stopped like a switch. She recovered fast. She stood up and smoothed her shirt, and she smiled at me, and there was nothing wrong with the smile except that it was managed. It was the smile of a woman who had been practicing. He came in and he was perfectly pleasant. He shook my hand. He said it was great to see me. He said Nadia hadn't mentioned I was coming, and there was something in the way he said it, not accusatory, just factual, just a notation, that made Nadia say quickly it was last minute she was in the area, explaining before he asked. Preemptive, the math of a woman who has learned to get ahead of the questions. I stayed another hour. I watched him ask her casually what she had spent at the bakery. I watched her tell him, and I watched him say with a smile that they were trying to keep to the budget this month. The budget. For kolaches, I watched my daughter apologize. She had a joint account with him and a personal account she'd had since her 20s. I found out later, much later, that he had asked her to close the personal account 18 months into the marriage. For simplicity, he said, for transparency. She closed it. He controlled every dollar she spent. He reviewed the credit card statements. He gave her, and this is the word she eventually used, gave a weekly amount for personal expenses. My daughter, who earns $112,000 a year as a hospital administrator. My daughter, who had a 401k and a savings account and a budget spreadsheet before she met him. He gave her $200 a week and called it her allowance. I did not know that yet when I drove home from Atlanta, but I knew enough. Her birthday is in October. She turned 36 on a Saturday, and Preston made a reservation at a restaurant in Buckhead, the kind of place where the lighting is dim enough to seem intimate and expensive enough to seem like generosity. He invited his sister, whose name is Monica, and Monica's husband and 2 of his friends from work. He did not ask Nadia who she wanted there. When I mentioned Keisha, he said the reservation was already set and they couldn't add anyone. I was invited. I want to be clear about that. I was seated at the table for my daughter's birthday because not inviting her mother would have looked a certain way, and Preston was very careful about how things looked. We ordered drinks. Nadia asked for a glass of Riesling, which is what she always orders, what she has ordered since the first time we went to a wine tasting together when she was 24. Preston looked at the menu and said, "What about the Chardonnay? The Riesling here is probably too sweet." He said it pleasantly. He said it like a man sharing useful information. Nadia ordered the Chardonnay. Monica said, "Good call," and smiled at Nadia with the particular smile of a woman who believes she is being helpful. I kept my face still. Then came the entree. Nadia looked at the menu for a while. She always takes a long time because she likes to read every option. She has always been that way. And Preston said, without looking up from his own menu, "You should probably get the chicken. You said you've been trying to watch what you eat." Nadia had not said that to me. She had not said that to anyone at the table. He said it like he was reminding her of something she'd forgotten. And she ordered the chicken. Monica laughed a little. Not a mean laugh, a complicit laugh, the laugh of someone who thinks this is simply how couples work. She said, "Nadia, you're lucky he pays attention." And then, to the table, she said, "Some women just need that kind of guidance." I set down my fork. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene. I folded my napkin in my lap and I said, "Nadia, what did you actually want to order?" And the table got quiet, the way tables do when someone has broken a rule that wasn't spoken out loud. Nadia looked at me. She looked at Preston. She said, "Mum, I'm fine." "I know you are," I said. "What did you want to order?" She was quiet for a moment, and then she said very quietly, "The salmon." I caught the server's eye. I said we would also need an order of the salmon. Preston smiled the way people smile when they are deciding whether to address something or let it go. He let it go. He let it go because the restaurant was full, and because I was her mother, and because making it a thing in that moment would have looked bad. But he did not let it go entirely. I watched him touch her forearm when she reached for the breadbasket. Just a touch, just 2 fingers, just for a second. She put the bread back. She didn't look at him when she did it. She had learned not to need the look. I excused myself before dessert. I said I needed to make a call. I walked to the back of the restaurant past the hostess stand, and I stood in the small hallway by the restrooms, and I called my attorney. Her name is Roslyn, and she has been my personal attorney for 12 years, and she is also one of the sharpest family law minds I know. I told her what I had been seeing. I told her about the account. I told her about the account. I told her about the breadbasket. She said, "Odette, this is financial abuse. This is documented controlling behavior. If your daughter wants to leave, she has a case." I said, "She doesn't know she wants to leave yet. She thinks this is her marriage." There was a pause on the line. Then Roslyn said, "Then she needs to know she has somewhere to go when she's ready." I went back to the table. I ate cake. I told Preston the reservation was lovely, which it was, because the food was genuinely good, and I was not going to give him the satisfaction of ruining his carefully assembled evening. I kissed my daughter on the cheek when we said good night, and I held on for a second longer than usual, and I said, against her hair, "Call me any time, for any reason. I'm always available." She said, "I know, Mom." She said it like a woman who wasn't sure she believed it, like it was too good to be a real offer. That drove home with me. That sat on the passenger seat the whole 2 hours back. I started keeping notes. I am an accountant. Documentation is not a foreign concept to me. I wrote down dates, observations, the conversation with Keisha, the breadbasket, the way she smoothed her shirt when his car pulled in. I noted what I didn't know and what I would need to find out. I called her every Sunday, not to ask about him, just to talk. About her work, which she loved. She is good at her job in the way that people are good at things they were made for. About the hospital renovations she was overseeing. About a podcast she'd started listening to. I let her lead. I let her come to me at whatever pace she could manage. 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, she called me on a Wednesday at 7 a.m. That told me everything before she said a word. Nadia does not call before 9 unless something is wrong. She said she was in the parking garage at work. She said she had been sitting there for 20 minutes because she wasn't ready to go in yet. She said she was fine, and I said, "I know you are. Tell me why you've been sitting there for 20 minutes. And she told me. She told me about the accounts, about the allowance, about the way he reviewed her email. He had her passwords. She had given them to him in the first year because he said it was about trust, about being open. She told me about a night 3 months before the birthday dinner, when they had argued about a charge on the credit card. She had bought new scrubs for a conference she was attending, $68 at a medical supply website. And he had followed her into the bedroom when she tried to end the conversation, and he had grabbed her arm. She told me about the bruise. I held the phone and I was very careful with my breathing. My daughter has a finely calibrated radar for whether the person she is talking to can handle what she is saying. If she thought I was going to fall apart, she would stop talking. I could not fall apart. She would stop talking. I said, "Okay, I hear you. You are safe right now in your car." She said yes. I said, "I need you to listen to me. None of this is your fault. Not the accounts, not the argument, not any of it. And you have options, real options. Will you let me help you understand what those options are?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I didn't want you to know. I thought you'd think I was stupid for letting it get this far." I will carry those words for the rest of my life. My daughter, who corrected her teacher at 9 years old, sitting in a parking garage afraid that her mother would think she was stupid. I said, "Nadia, the only thing I think is that you survived something very hard and you picked up the phone. That is not stupidity, that is courage." She cried. I had not heard her cry since her father died 7 years ago. I drove to Atlanta that afternoon. I brought Rosin's card and a folder with the notes I'd been keeping and the number for a domestic violence advocate that Rosin had connected me with, a woman who specialized specifically in financial abuse cases in the state of Georgia, who understood what it meant for a high-earning woman to have had her financial autonomy dismantled from the inside. We sat in Nadia's car in that parking garage for 2 hours. She talked. I listened. I did not tell her what to do. I am her mother and I am 63 years old, and I know enough to know that telling a woman in her situation what to do is the fastest way to make her protect the person you are trying to help her leave. I answered her questions. Yes, she had legal recourse regarding the accounts. Yes, her income was hers, regardless of what he had convinced her of. Yes, Rosalind could help her understand her options before she had decided anything. Yes, my house was available whenever she needed it, for as long as she needed it, no questions and no timeline. She called Rosalind the next morning. What happened over the next 4 months is detailed enough to be its own story, and most of it is Nadia's to tell, not mine. What I will say is this: she was strategic in a way that I was not surprised by, because she has always been strategic, and Preston had not managed to take that from her. She made copies of every financial document she could access. She opened a new personal account at a bank he had no relationship with. She worked with the advocate to understand the paper trail of financial control that had existed in their marriage. Preston did not see it coming. Men like Preston rarely do, because they have spent so long being certain they are the one with all the information. When Nadia moved out, she was gone in 4 hours. She had help, Keisha and her Aunt Ruby, and 2 of the guys from her hospital's facilities team who were, as she put it, very enthusiastic about the project. Preston was at work. The apartment was a rental in her name as much as his. She took what was hers and she left him a note on paper, brief and factual. He called me. He actually called me. He was controlled about it, which is what I expected. But there was something underneath the control that I recognized from my career, the particular tone of a person who has just realized the numbers don't work anymore. I told him that Nadia had representation and that any further contact should go through her attorney. He said, "Odette, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I think you may have influenced her." I said, "She's 36 years old. She doesn't need my influence." And then I hung up. It has been 8 months. Nadia is living in my guest room right now, which is something I thought would last maybe 6 weeks and has turned into something else entirely. something I did not expect to treasure as much as I do. We have Sunday dinner again, every week. Ruby comes. Keisha comes. We make too much food and we stay at the table longer than we need to. Sometimes we talk about Preston and sometimes we don't. Sometimes Nadia comes home from work and she's quiet and I give her space. And sometimes she comes home and she talks for 2 hours straight and I am grateful for every word. She is working with a therapist. She is rebuilding her savings. She is learning, she told me recently, to order what she actually wants from the menu. Small thing, not a small thing. I want to speak to anyone listening who is watching their child or their sister or their friend from the outside of a situation like this one. You feel helpless. I know you feel helpless. The impulse is to shake them, to say, "Can't you see it?" But they can see it. They see it more clearly than you do because they are living inside it. What they cannot yet see is the exit. Your job is to be the exit. Be boring, be steady. Call on Sundays and talk about nothing. Show up with kolaches. Don't make them choose between you and their marriage, because they will feel forced to choose the marriage, because that is what the manipulation has trained them to do. Just be there and be constant. And when they call you from a parking garage at 7 in the morning, don't fall apart. Be the steady ground. I have one more thing to say, and I say it to my daughter, who I know watches these videos sometimes. Nadia, you never needed anyone to order for you. You never needed guidance. You never needed managing. You walked into this world knowing your own mind. And the fact that someone worked very hard for years to make you forget that does not say one single thing about who you are. It says everything about who he is. You made the call. You sat in that car and you made the call. I am so proud of you. I don't have words for it, and I have always been a woman with words. If you are listening to this and you are where my daughter was, please save the texts. Take a photo of the statements. Write down what happened and when it happened. You are not overreacting. You are not imagining it. And there is a way out that does not require you to lose everything, even though he has probably told you otherwise. There is always a door. Sometimes you just need someone to stand next to it until you're ready to walk through. I have thought about that parking garage a lot since October. The image of my daughter, 36 years old, a hospital administrator, a woman who manages multi-million-dollar facility budgets for a living, sitting in her car for 20 minutes because she didn't feel ready to walk into her own workplace. That is what sustained, deliberate control does to a person. It doesn't break them all at once. It works slowly, the way water works on stone, and by the time they notice the erosion, they've already forgotten what the stone used to look like. What happened to Nadia happened because Preston understood something that abusers always understand, that the most effective cage has no visible bars. He didn't isolate her with cruelty. He isolated her with concern. He didn't take her money with force. He took it with a spreadsheet and a conversation about transparency. Every act of control was wrapped in the language of love, and that is precisely what made it so hard to see from the inside. But here is what I know from 31 years of following the numbers. The truth always has a paper trail, and the truth about who Preston was had been there from the beginning, in the way Nadia straightened when she heard his car, in the way she explained herself before he asked, in the way she stopped ordering the shrimp. I missed it at first because I was looking for something that looked like harm. I wasn't looking for something that looked like a husband paying attention. I think about Nadia's courage often, not the courage of the dramatic moment, though walking out took real courage too, but the quieter courage she showed over months, the courage of continuing to go to work every day and be excellent at her job when she was carrying something that heavy, the courage of calling Keisha back after years of distance, the courage of picking up the phone at 7 in the morning and telling the truth to the one person she was most afraid to disappoint. That kind of courage doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. What I want anyone listening to take from this is not just the warning signs, though those matter. What I want you to take is this. The way out of a situation like Nadia's required all three things working together. It required her to hold on to her sense of right and wrong, her core understanding that what was happening to her was not acceptable, even when he had spent years trying to convince her it was normal. It required her to think clearly, to gather documents, to understand her legal position, to be strategic rather than reactive. And it required her to keep going on the days when going on felt impossible, when she was sitting in a parking garage at 7 in the morning, not sure she could walk through a door. Moral clarity, clear thinking, the will to keep moving. Take any one of those away and the story ends differently. Preston is a consequence of his own choices. I don't spend much time on him. I spend my time on Nadia, who orders exactly what she wants from the menu now, every single time, and who called me last Sunday to tell me she'd started running again in the mornings, something she'd stopped doing 2 years into the marriage because he'd said the early alarm disturbed him. She runs at 5:30 now. She told me the neighborhood is quiet and the air is cool, and she forgot how much she loved it. That is not a small thing.